There's a piece of audio out there that once you hear it, you genuinely cannot stop thinking about. I know that sounds like something people say, like it's a thing you just put in a YouTube description to get people to click. But I mean this in a very literal way. People who have heard this recording, investigators, journalists, people who just stumbled across it online at 2 in the morning, they all say the same thing, that it sounds like something that should not exist.
And for a brief window of time, you could actually listen to it. The sheriff's department in a small Oklahoma county released it to the public. They put it out there. And then within days, maybe hours depending on who you ask, it was gone, pulled down. No explanation, no press conference, no statement, just gone.
Now, think about that for a second. Because if the audio showed nothing, if it was just static or a mundane call about a stranded vehicle, know that he pulls it. You don't take something down because it's boring. You take something down because it's the opposite of boring. You take it down because it raises more questions than it answers. Or maybe because it answers a question that someone doesn't want answered.
And the thing is, the audio is only one piece of this story. Because the story itself, the actual case, the actual family at the center of all of this, is already one of the most baffling disappearances in modern American history, even without the recording. The recording is just the part that keeps people up at night. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you the full story, everything, from the beginning, step by step, all of it. And at some point in this video, we're going to get to the recording. And I want you to make up your own mind about what you think it means, because I genuinely do not know. I have looked at this case from every possible angle, and I still don't know. And I think that's the thing that makes it so hard to let go of. This is the story of Bobby, Sherilyn, and Madison Jamison, and what happened to them on a mountain in southeastern Oklahoma in the fall of 2009.
Before we get into what happened, I think it's worth spending some time with who these people actually were. Because in a lot of mystery content, the victim or the missing person kind of gets reduced to a name and a photo and a set of facts. And I don't want to do that here. Because the Jamisons were a real family with real texture to them, and I think understanding who they were is genuinely important to understanding what might have happened. Bobby Dale Jamison was 44 years old. He lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, which is a small town in the eastern part of the state. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody and news travels fast and nothing much ever really happens. Bobby worked in construction. He was a big guy, physically imposing, but by most accounts, people who knew him described him as gentle, kind of quiet, not the type to cause trouble. His wife, Sherilyn, was 40. She and Bobby had been together for years, and they had 3 kids together. But by October of 2009, only one of them was still living at home. That was their youngest daughter, Madison. She was 6 years old. She was tiny, she had this long blonde hair, and by every account from people who knew the family, she was the center of both of her parents' worlds.
Now, I want to be upfront here because this is a case where the details of the family's personal life are going to become relevant, and I want to handle that carefully. Bobby and Sherilyn had a complicated dynamic. There is court documentation showing that at various points in their marriage, things got difficult. There were allegations of threats and confrontations. Bobby had applied for a restraining order against Sherilyn at one point. Sherilyn had done the same against Bobby. Now, whether any of that is relevant to what ultimately happened to this family, I genuinely don't know, but I think it's important context, and I think you deserve to have it. What I can tell you is that in the fall of 2009, they were still together. And whatever the turbulence of their relationship, they were, as far as anyone could tell, functioning as a unit, as a family. They were raising their daughter, Bobby was working, and then something shifted.
In the weeks leading up to October 2009, Bobby began talking about land. Specifically, he wanted to buy a piece of property out in the Panola Mountain area, which is this rugged, remote stretch of the Sandboys Mountains in southeastern Oklahoma. Now, this part of Oklahoma is not glamorous. It is not a destination. It is dense forest and steep terrain, and frankly, not a lot of infrastructure. There are no real towns out there, there are no services, there are barely roads in parts of it. And the piece of property Bobby was interested in was particularly remote. He'd found it online, a 40-acre parcel that was listed for sale for around $50,000, and he had become, by late September, genuinely fixated on it, telling friends and family about it, talking about the plans he had, the life he was going to build out there for his family. Now, some people in Bobby's life thought this was exciting, a fresh start, new land. And some people thought it was strange, because why there? Why that specific patch of wilderness? And why this sudden urgency?
But Bobby was determined. And so, on October 8th, 2009, Bobby and Sherilyn loaded Madison into their pickup truck, put their dog in the back, and headed out to Panola Mountain to look at the property. They were never seen alive again. The first thing you need to understand about where the Jamesons were going is just how remote this area actually is. Panola Mountain and the surrounding land in that part of the Samboy Range is not the kind of place that shows up on tourist maps. There are no visitor centers. There are no maintained trails in the section the Jamesons were heading to. There is essentially just a dirt road that winds up into the mountains, and then past a certain point, even that gives out. Cell service out there is virtually non-existent. If something goes wrong, you are on your own in a pretty fundamental way. And the terrain itself is difficult, steep, heavily wooded, full of sudden elevation changes. People who know that area well say that it is very easy to get disoriented out there, very easy to go the wrong direction and not realize it until it's too late. On October 8th, Bobby drove his pickup out to that area with Sherilyn and Madison. At some point during that day, he parked the truck on a dirt road, right in the middle of nowhere essentially. And at some point after that, all three of them vanished. Now here is where things get immediately deeply strange. The truck was found on October 16th, 8 days after the family was last known to be out there. It was parked on a dirt road on the mountain, and when authorities got to it and began examining it, what they found inside raised more questions than it answered. First, the truck was locked. The keys were inside the vehicle, not in the ignition, but inside the truck, which is already a little unusual. If you're leaving your truck, you typically take your keys with you. But okay, maybe there's an explanation for that. Second, the family's wallets were inside the truck, all of their identification, all of their cash, and there was a significant amount of cash in there, reportedly close to $32,000, just sitting there. Third, Madison's medication was in the truck. She had a prescription that she needed to take regularly, left behind. Fourth, the family dog was in the truck, alive, but just barely. The dog had been left inside the locked vehicle for what appeared to be multiple days without food or water. It was severely dehydrated and in pretty bad shape. And here is maybe the most unsettling thing of all. There was no sign of struggle, no indication that anything bad had happened in or around the vehicle. No blood, no broken glass, no obvious signs of a fight or an altercation. The truck was just parked there, locked, with everything inside it, including the dog, including all the money, including all the ID, as if the family had just stepped out for a moment and then simply ceased to exist. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, maybe they went for a hike, maybe they got lost out there. That happens. People go into remote wilderness and misjudge the terrain or the weather, and they get disoriented and they don't make it back. It's tragic, but it happens. And yes, that's a theory. That's one of the theories. But here's the problem with it. You don't leave your wallet and your cash and your child's medication and your dog behind for a hike. Not intentionally. Like maybe one of those things you forget, but all of them? That's not a hike. Something else happened. When Bobby's father, Bob Sr., reported the family missing on October 16th, after multiple days of not hearing from them, the Latimer County Sheriff's Department launched a search, and it was a serious search. They brought in dogs, they brought in helicopters, they combed that mountain, and they found nothing. No footprints, no signs that anyone had passed through the area in any discernible direction, no campsites, no trash, no clothing left behind. For a family of 3, including a 6-year-old child, they left essentially no trace whatsoever in that terrain, which again is strange. Children leave traces. Kids drop things, they break branches, they make noise. You can typically follow the path of a young child through wilderness in a way that's very difficult to conceal.
The search was eventually called off. Authorities determined that without more information, there wasn't much more they could do. The mountain was too vast, the terrain too difficult, and there were simply no leads to follow. The case went from a search and rescue to a missing persons investigation. And then the investigators started really looking at the evidence they did have. And that's when things got even more complicated.
When detectives went through the contents of that truck more carefully, they found a few things that they initially did not publicize. Details that were held back for a while, either because they were still being analyzed or because investigators weren't sure what to make of them, or, some people believe, for other reasons entirely. The first thing was a handwritten note, found inside the cab of the truck, written in Sherilyn's handwriting. In the note, the contents of which were not fully disclosed publicly for some time, appeared to be deeply concerning. People who have claimed to have read it or have spoken to people close to the investigation describe it as erratic, as the writing of someone in a highly agitated or distressed mental state. Now, there has been some suggestion over the years that both Bobby and Sherilyn may have been dealing with mental health issues. There were references in various records to medications, to periods of instability. And I want to be very careful here because I don't want to reduce two people to a diagnosis or to use that as a way to dismiss what happened to them. But it does seem to be part of the picture.
The second thing was this. Investigators went through Bobby's phone records and discovered that in the weeks before the family disappeared, Bobby had been making a series of increasingly alarming calls. He had called his pastor, for one thing, and reportedly told the pastor that he believed his family was under some kind of spiritual attack, that there were forces. He apparently used language that suggested something dark, something he felt was pursuing them. He had also allegedly told people close to him that he was concerned about a specific individual, a neighbor, and that this person had made threats against the family. Bobby had reportedly gone so far as to take out a life insurance policy on himself and on Sherilyn not long before they disappeared. And then there was what investigators found when they looked at Bobby's laptop. On Bobby's computer, in the weeks leading up to October 8th, there were searches. Searches for things like how to dispose of a body, information about committing violence, references to dark subjects that, when you put them together with everything else, paint a genuinely troubling picture. Now, I want to pause here because I know what you might be thinking, and I want to address it directly. When investigators found those searches on Bobby's laptop, a lot of people, including people in the media, immediately jumped to a conclusion. They said, Bobby did something to his wife and daughter. Bobby was researching how to harm them. Bobby is not a victim here. Bobby is the perpetrator.
And look, I understand why people go there. On the surface, those searches look bad. They look really bad. But here's the thing. Bobby Jamison was also found dead on that mountain, eventually. His remains and the remains of his wife and his daughter were all found together in the same location 4 years later. So whatever was happening in Bobby's head in those weeks before they disappeared, whatever darkness was swirling around in there, it did not end with Bobby walking away. He died on that mountain too, which means either something happened to all three of them, some external force, some encounter, something out there in that wilderness, or Bobby did something terrible to his family and then to himself. Neither option is comfortable. Both options raise questions that can't fully be answered.
Before we get to the audio recording, I need to tell you about the surveillance footage. Because the surveillance footage is actually what made this case go nationally viral before the recording ever surfaced, and its important context. On October 8th, 2009, the day the Jamisons drove out to that mountain, they stopped at a gas station on the way, and that gas station had surveillance cameras, and those cameras captured footage of Bobby and Sherilyn and Madison at the gas station that day. And the footage is strange.
In the footage, you can see Bobby get out of the truck and walk into the gas station, and he moves in a way that's hard to describe. Not injured, not visibly in distress, but off. His gait is slow and deliberate in a way that doesn't quite match just being tired or preoccupied. Sherilyn, in the footage, is moving similarly. She's walking back and forth between the truck and the station in what looks to many people who have watched this footage like an almost trance-like state. And 6-year-old Madison is there too, walking around near the truck.
People have argued at length about what exactly the footage shows. Some people say the family was clearly under the influence of something.
drugs, medication, or something else. Some people say they were just tired, just people doing people things, and that we're reading too much into normal behavior because we know what happened to them after. There's a version of watching that footage without any context, just as a clip of a family at a gas station and seeing nothing. And there's a version where you know the full story, and you watch it and something in your gut says, something is already wrong here. Something has already happened that we can't see. I'll let you watch it yourself. I'll include a link in the description. Watch it before someone tells you what to think about it if you can. Your instinct in those first 30 seconds says something.
For 4 years, the Jameson case remained open and unsolved. It was featured on television programs. It circulated online. People had theories, dozens of them, hundreds of them if you count every Reddit thread and true crime forum. Some people believed the family had staged their own disappearance and was living somewhere under new identities. Some people believed they'd encountered someone dangerous on that mountain. Some people pointed to the spiritual content of Bobby's conversations with his pastor and suggested something more complicated. And then, in November of 2013, deer hunters found something in a remote section of the San Bois Mountains: human skeletal remains, partially scoutered, which is consistent with 4 years of exposure to the elements and to wildlife. Investigators responded, and over the course of the recovery process, they found the remains of 3 people.
DNA testing confirmed it was Bobby Jameson, 44, Sherilyn Jameson, 40, and Madison Jameson, 6 years old. They had been found roughly 4 miles from where their truck was parked. 4 miles through extremely difficult mountain terrain with a 6-year-old. Now, when the remains were found, there was initially a lot of hope, grim hope, but hope, that a cause of death could be determined, that there would finally be some answer, some resolution, some explanation. The medical examiner's office conducted an examination of the remains, and their conclusion was undetermined. The remains were too decomposed, too scattered, too weathered to yield a definitive cause of death. There was no obvious trauma visible on the bones that had been recovered. There was no bullet wound, no fracture consistent with violence, no clear evidence of foul play, but also no clear evidence that it was an accident or an exposure death either. Undetermined. After 4 years of waiting, after all of that searching, after a family of 3 was found on a mountain, undetermined. Which means we still don't know how they died. We don't know why they left their truck. We don't know what they encountered out there. We don't know if someone else was involved. We don't know anything more definitive than we did before the remains were found. And I think that ambiguity is part of why this case has never really gone away. Because there was no closing chapter. There was no arrest, no trial, no guilty verdict, no moment where someone stood up and said, "Here is what happened." It just ended with 3 skeletons in mountains and a medical examiner's report that said, "We don't know."
Okay, now we get to the part that I promised you at the beginning, the audio. And before I tell you about it, I want to give you a bit of context about how it came to exist, because that context matters. At some point during the investigation, the timing of this has been disputed and is frankly a little unclear. The sheriff's department became aware of a 911 call, or more specifically, a call that was either to 911 or connected to the 911 dispatch system. The details of exactly how this call entered the record are murky, depending on which source you read and which investigator or official you believe. What is agreed upon is this: the call was associated with the Jameson case. It was connected to the investigation, and at some point the decision was made to release it to the public. The audio was posted, I believe initially through a local news outlet, and then more widely shared on various platforms. And when people heard it, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming, because the recording is deeply disturbing. Now, I need to be careful here. I'm going to describe what you hear on the recording, because I think you deserve to know what's in it. But I also need to acknowledge that some of what you hear on the recording is genuinely difficult to interpret. People have analyzed it, enhanced it, slowed it down, played it in loops, and there is disagreement, real, sincere disagreement, about what exactly you're hearing in certain parts. Here is what most people agree on. The recording is a voicemail, not a live 911 call, a voicemail message left on a phone connected to the dispatch system. The voice you hear is Sherilyn's, and she is clearly upset. Her voice is shaking in a way that isn't just nerves or emotion. It sounds like physical fear, like something visceral.
And then there is the other voice. In the background of the recording, underneath Sherilyn's voice, there is something else. A second voice, or possibly more than one voice. The nature of those voices is the most contested part of the recording. Some people say it sounds like another person nearby, possibly Bobby, possibly someone else. Some people who have analyzed the audio say it sounds like a voice telling Sherilyn what to say, like she's being directed. Others have listened to the same recording and said they hear something that doesn't sound human. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the kind of thing someone sensationalizes to get clicks. But I'm not going to dismiss it entirely, because the number of people who have described the same experience, hearing something on that recording that they cannot account for, is not small.
And then the recording ends, abruptly, mid-sentence, essentially, like it was cut off. People who heard the recording described feeling genuinely unsettled by it in a way that was hard to articulate. Not just sad. There's a lot of sad audio in true crime content, and people are somewhat habituated to that. This was something different. The specific quality of Sherilyn's voice, the specific quality of whatever is in that background. People kept saying it sounded wrong in a way they couldn't place. And then it was taken down.
The official explanation, to the extent that there was an official explanation, was that the release of the audio had been an error, that it was evidence in an ongoing investigation and should not have been made public, which on its face is a reasonable explanation. Evidence in an active case probably shouldn't be just floating around on the internet. But the timing of it, the fact that it went up, people started really talking about it, really analyzing it, really making noise about what they were hearing in the background, and then it came down. That sequence of events has never fully sat right with a lot of people. Because here's the thing, the case was never fully resolved. The cause of death is undetermined. There was no arrest, no prosecution, no trial. In a situation like that, in a situation where the case is not closed and no one is behind bars, what is the ongoing investigative reason to suppress audio that the public has already heard? What is being protected?
Some people believe the answer is nothing, that it really was just an administrative error and there's nothing more to it. And some people believe that something in that recording, something in that background, something in Sherilyn's words, or something about the metadata or the origin of the call itself, pointed in a direction that someone in a position of authority did not want publicly discussed. I genuinely do not know which of those things is true.
Okay, we've been through the whole story now, and I want to spend some time here just walking through the main theories, the explanations that have been put forward for what happened to this family, and I want to be honest about what the evidence supports and what it doesn't. Theory 1, they got lost and died of exposure. This is the simplest theory. The family went out to look at the property, something went wrong. Maybe the truck broke down, maybe they wandered off the road, maybe they misjudged the terrain. They ended up miles from their vehicle in difficult wilderness, and they died of exposure. Arguments for this. The Sandboz Mountains are genuinely dangerous terrain. People die in remote wilderness all the time, even people who are experienced outdoors. And the cause of death being undetermined is consistent with an exposure death. The bones wouldn't show that. Arguments against this. Why leave the wallets and the $32,000 and the medication and the dog? Why 4 miles from the truck? Why do the remains end up together, all 3 of them in the same location, if they were wandering, lost? And what about the audio recording? What about the voice in the background?
Theory 2, Bobby did something terrible. Given the searches on Bobby's laptop, this theory has had a lot of traction. The suggestion is that Bobby, in a state of mental or emotional crisis, harmed Sherilyn and Madison and then died himself, either by his own hand or by exposure after the fact. Arguments for this. The laptop searches are deeply concerning and cannot be dismissed. Bobby was reportedly in a very dark place in the weeks before the disappearance. The life insurance policies, the conversations about being under spiritual attack. Arguments against this. The medical examiner found no trauma consistent with violence on the recovered remains, and Sherilyn's voice on the recording,
her fear, her distress sounds external. It sounds like she is afraid of something outside her immediate family, not inside it. Although I acknowledge that interpretation is subjective. Theory 3. The encountered someone. The theory that the Jameson family, in that remote stretch of mountain, crossed paths with someone dangerous. That their deaths were not accidental and not family internal. That there was a third party involved. Arguments for this. Bobby had reportedly told people that someone had been threatening them. The background voice on the recording. The fact that all three of them ended up in the same location, miles from the truck, which is more consistent with being directed somewhere than with wandering. Arguments against this. No physical evidence of any third party was ever found. No forensic evidence on the remains or at the scene pointed to anyone else being present. And law enforcement, at least publicly, has never indicated that a third party is a serious theory they're pursuing.
Theory 4. Something we don't have a category for. And then there are people who, after exhausting every rational explanation, arrive at a place where they say, I don't know what happened, but it doesn't fit any of the boxes I have available. People who grew up in that part of Oklahoma, people who know those mountains, have said things about that area that are hard to rationalize. There is a history in the Sandboys Range of people going missing, not at a statistically significant rate, but enough that locals know it, enough that the area has a reputation among people who live near it. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. I'm just telling you it's part of the picture that people carry around with this case. The people who have spent time in those mountains and who know that something about that terrain, about that specific stretch of Oklahoma wilderness, has claimed more than its share. I don't know what to make of it. I really don't.
As of today, the Jameson case remains officially unsolved. The cause of death for all three family members is listed as undetermined. No one has ever been charged with anything in connection with their deaths. The investigation, as far as anyone can tell from the outside, is not actively producing new leads. Madison Jameson was 6 years old. She should be in her early 20s now. She should be out there somewhere living her life. And instead, she's a name in a case file in a county sheriff's office in southeastern Oklahoma, and nobody knows what happened to her. Bobby and Sherilyn deserved answers too. Whatever was going on in their lives in those final weeks, whatever darkness was swirling around them, they were people. They were parents. They got in a truck and drove up a mountain, and they never came back. And the people who loved them have been waiting for 15 years for someone to tell them why.
The audio recording is out there. It has been re-uploaded and shared and taken down and re-uploaded again so many times that at this point, it's impossible to say whether you can find the original or a copy or something that's been altered. If you go looking for it, be careful about what you're finding. Be careful about provenance. Be careful about people who have added things to it or claimed to have enhanced it. Listen to the oldest, least processed version you can find and form your own opinion. And when you do, when you hear Sherilyn's voice and you hear that background and you sit with what it makes you feel, I want you to remember that she was a real person and that she was afraid, and that whatever she was afraid of, it did not let her family go.
I don't have a tidy ending for you. I don't have a revelation or a resolution or a final answer that ties everything together. I just have a family that walked up a mountain, and a recording that was released and then pulled, and an official cause of death that reads undetermined. And I think that's going to have to be enough, for now, until it isn't. If you watched all the way to the end of this one, genuinely, thank you. I know this story is heavy, and I don't take lightly the fact that you spent this much time with it. If you have information about the Jameson case, if you know something, if you heard something, if you were anywhere near that area in October of 2009, the Latimer County Sheriff's Department in Oklahoma is the right place to call. A family is waiting for answers, a real family, and those answers might still exist somewhere. If you want more stories like this one, strange, dark, unsolved, delivered without flinching, we upload regularly, and we try to do right by the people at the center of every story we tell. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back next time. Until then, take care of yourself
and take care of each other.